Hello, my name is Peter Morgan, and this will be my presentation of Michelangelo's The Creation of Adam, which is a fresco. So let's get into it. Who was Michelangelo? He's probably one of the most influential artists, painters, sculptors, architects, and he was even a poet too, of the Renaissance period, and probably of all time too. So Michelangelo was born in Caprice, Italy, around the year 1475. So almost since birth, he really had I would say je ne sais quoi, but I'm not entirely sure what that means. He had a natural talent. He was very naturally talented. He studied under a very famous artist at the time. His mentor, his name was Domenico Ghirlandaio. So that's where, his tutelage came from, that guy. And for most of his life, he was commissioned by the Vatican to paint the Sistine Chapel, which is where this fresco is taken from. So the Sistine Chapel, a marvel of architecture at the time, even modern architecture. And the Vatican, which Michelangelo worked closely with, they commissioned him to paint the entire inside, the entire, ceiling. This is actually on the ceiling, as far as it is to believe, and it's surrounded, outside these borders by 100 other paintings, but this is probably the most famous. Michelangelo also later in life had a hand in the architecture of St. Peter's Basilica. Peter. But he really just, made art his entire life. And one other thing I want to mention about the Vatican, when he was younger, when he was still being mentored by Ghirlandaio, he was given access to corpses, like cadavers, dead people. So he really got a supernatural, almost, understanding of the human body. Veins, ligaments, things like that. So let's get into the medium. So what is a fresco? What is this? Is it just paint on a wall? Not entirely. Almost, kind of, but not really. So in this specific case, Michelangelo would take his pigments and he would paint them onto lime plaster directly on as the plaster dried. Now, how does this differ from, me painting on my wall right here? It differs a lot. My wall is dry. It's been dry for a million years. But when you're painting onto wet plaster like this, the pigments create like chemical bond with the plaster. So not only is the paint going to stay on the wall, but it literally becomes part of the wall. So, like say you spray paint on the wall. Over time, because it's not chemically bonded with the wall itself, or the plaster on the wall, it's not going to, keep up forever. But since this is basically part of the wall, it's going to degrade at the same way that the plaster will degrade, which is much, much slower than just regular paint. So the method. Michelangelo used a method called buon fresco, which means he was painting directly onto the plaster. But that also comes with a lot of time constraints. As the plaster dries, Michelangelo runs out of time to actually, put his art on the wall. So he would do this, he made this painting, as well as other frescoes in very small sections. So, say you would just focus on this piece, like the foot. They would lay the plaster, he would get to work almost immediately, and he had very, very little time before it would dry. So this was a very, very tedious process. Now, the implements. He used lime plaster, obviously. I'm gonna mention it a million more times. And also a array of brushes made from small and large animal hairs, regular paintbrush material. And before he did it, actually, obviously he's not just going in, blind, making it up as he goes along. Michelangelo made numerous sketches in charcoal, mostly charcoal pencils, things like that. Making sketches, really, setting himself up for later when he would have to work under such time constraints. Now, the surface materials. I'm gonna say it one more time. Lime plaster. That's what the wall is made from. What else? I already went over how, you know, it connects to the wall, chemical bonds, it becomes part of it. Very, what's the word? It becomes very permanent. Not totally permanent, but semi. So the creative process. Now, I already went over his use of sketches and planning out, but the process itself was, you know, tedious. Not only because, you know, he has to plaster has to dry, but it's on the ceiling, so he's up 65 feet in the air on his back, you know, on these like wooden like scaffolding, just like very close. You know, he didn't have the ability or the luxury, you could say, of, you know, standing back and saying, oh, is that angel's face too big? Did I make God's ears too small? Things like that. So he's like, it's as if I'm like right here, you know? And I was just like, you know, little at a time. I'm back away from the camera now. So once again, it was insanely tedious. It's insane that he could even make this. Was, you know, Michelangelo touched by God himself? Who knows? Not me. I know the guy personally. So category, it's realism. I mean, look at his muscles. Looks just like, you know, the muscles on my legs. You know, mine aren't that, you know, voluptuous, but his understanding of the body, like corpses, was far beyond, like, almost on the level like a mortician today, you know? Because just look at the way, like, if you pay attention to the hand, you know, you got Adam's hand, which, you know, if I put my hand out like that, just let go limp. He creates that perfectly, and then God's finger, you know, stretched out as far as it possibly can, maximum. I'm gonna get back to that in the concept part of this presentation, because that really ties in a lot to the meaning, or supposed meanings, interpretations, what have you. But the realism really comes, just look, the muscles, the veins, the contours of the face, it's intensely realistic. Now, what is the subject? Touched on a little bit before, I'll get back to it. Yeah, so we have two subjects, three maybe if you want to count all the angels, but for the most part, the two subjects are Adam, the first man in Christianity, also Judaism, I think. Don't quote me on that. But you know, we got two subjects. You know, they meet in the middle. I wouldn't really call the hands a subject. I mean, unless you zoomed in. But you know, we have God, Adam. The subject is they're about to touch, almost, but not really, not totally. So the visual elements, lines. We have a lot of lines and we have a lot of shapes. So I'm gonna go over these and kind of fire these off a little bit. Contour lines. So we have the billowing of the fabric. We have the hairs blown out in the wind, this godly wind. Contour lines of the muscles, the shape. Like, look at the shadows. You know, it's insane. Like, point of light. I'd say the light. You know, the light's probably coming from that direction. You know, just because of the way the lines, the contour lines, the implied lines. Let me touch on the implied line. So we have a couple right here. So an implied line being a connector between two hands. The hands don't actually touch. There's no like line that really cuts off the outline, like the contour lines that, you know, separate Adam and God from the background. But implied lines, you could even say the gaze between both of them. They're looking directly at each other. You know? Adam kind of, you know, chin tucked, not really, who is that guy? And God, you know, full purpose with his, you know, the implied line, his eye line and finger and things like that. So the shapes, obviously very organic. The muscles, the body parts, the knees, the feet, the toes, very organic, you know. Cadavers fiddling with all those corpses really, got him in the headspace, gave him the skill, gave him the technique to pull things like this off. And positive, negative shapes. Positive shapes are two subjects right here. Negative shape, negative space, I guess you could say, is the background, the sky, mostly because we have some mountains and some little scenery, but it's a lot of negative space in the back. It's almost, the focus, the subject. The focus is directly on the subject. All right, so value. I hate saying this word. Chiskoro. First one kind of sounded Japanese. It really comes down to the shading. Like the way, it's just the technique that he uses to create shadows, things like that, focal points of light. And let's get on to color contrast, naturalistic colors. So these are all really natural like tones and shades, natural skin colors, natural color of the fabric. The mountains, again, a lot of earth tones in this painting. And the contrasting colors. So we have Adam, naked as the day he was created. How about that? And then you have all this color, really, right here. Like Adam really doesn't have too much color, it's just, skin. But we get these like deep, like kind of purplish, red and green, coming from the angels, God's wardrobe. It's also interesting, if you're looking at it from a color point of view, they're all naked, so they all have the same, color to them. But God is the only one that's, wearing colors. It's really a contrast. That's why he sticks out. He's not like them. He's not even like the angels, even though they're, otherworldly. They're not on the same level as what that's like meant to communicate. All right, so space. You really get a feel for 3 dimensions. It's not a sculpture, so it's not a 3-dimensional piece of art, but you get a real understanding of the space. The space between the fingers. See people getting smaller. It's the word. I wonder if snapping my fingers makes me remember. I hope so. You get depth. That's what I was looking for. Depth within, this cloak, a little piece of cloth, I would say, fabric that encapsulates, the angels surrounding God. You really get an idea